not everyone does this, and a lot of people disagree, but here's the point is that I like to get the numbers on a deal, and I like to do a back of the napkin kind of analysis. And really, that's just information that I have off the offering memorandum or what have you. Maybe I have a rent roll, maybe I have some detailed financials, but I just do a back of the napkin, and where does this deal make sense? I don't look at the property, I don't fall in love with the property, I just look at the numbers. Because what happens is, and it's inexperienced investors will go look at a deal and they'll see how pretty the view is and how pretty the rooms are. And let's just say it's a multifamily, such a beautiful, and then all of a sudden you fall in love emotionally and then you start justifying why the deal works. So now you fall in love with this deal, you want this property, now you start looking at the numbers.
Hey, Dad. Good to be with you again. So today we are going to be talking about investment as a whole and how we do that wisely, how we engage the people that we invest with. So essentially, you're going to be teaching me by walking through a investment deal from beginning to end. And so a few years ago, you had a property in Albuquerque. It was on 1510 and 1512 First Street. And you bought and you sold this deal within the mass of a few years. So can you talk to me a little bit about how you first got into this deal? How did you find it? How did this property come up?
Yeah. First of all, it's good to be with you, son. It's always good to see you. And thank you for the opportunity to hang out with you. So the 15s is what we call this investment property, 1510 and 1512. This is an old industrial in downtown Albuquerque, and it was about 40,000 square feet roughly, with a lot of power. Now, I didn't find this deal. One of the brokers in my office brought this deal and said there was a deal to be done because of pricing. The person that owned it, a friend of mine, he had a little bit of motivation to sell. Based on what was happening in the market in New Mexico, industrial was going through the roof. What used to get, $6, $8, $9 rents, it was $15, $16, $17 rents. Things were going through the roof. There was a lot of pressure because there wasn't a lot of supply due to all kinds of different things after the pandemic, cannabis and so forth. Supply was really big. Really small during that time. Not enough supply, a lot of demand. So prices were shooting up high. And this broker brought me the opportunity and say, hey, we can do a deal here. And I looked at it, not much of anything to look at from the outside. It was like, wow, this is garbage, right? But then you walk inside and it was, wow, this is a really, really nice space. And, it had 3-phase power. And it was just a beautiful space. And so when this was brought to my attention, I usually like to have a tenant in tow. I don't like to buy something spec thinking that I can fill it up. And chances are I could have, just because at the price that I was getting at based on what was going on in the market, chances are I could have done it. But I'm pretty conservative, and I thought, who could we get in here? So I locked up the deal. And what I mean by that is I put the deal under contract because the numbers made sense. And then I started trying to figure out who I could put in there as a tenant. And the broker that brought me the deal, also an investor in the deal, also had a tenant for the deal, right? So it was kind of like a really nice package. And from there, it was a home run. And I wish every deal was like that. The return was crazy. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. You said a few things that I want to clarify. The first thing you said was because you said there was a deal to be done. That the broker who brought you the deal said there was a deal to be done, and it was a matter of pricing. And then you go and look at it, and you're like, there's nothing. Or you looking at it on paper, and there's not much to look at. So what were like the details of the deal, or the headlines that made your broker say, hey, there's a deal to be done? How does one recognize there's a deal to be done?
Yeah, so I'll be more specific. the market for industrial was crazy. In other words, people were paying above market for industrial space because there wasn't a whole lot of supply and plenty of demand. And so when the broker brought me this deal, I saw the price per square foot way below what was happening. Industrial was selling at $120, $150 a square foot, even as high as at $180 a square foot, and this was way below $100 a square foot, way below. So I knew that there was something cooking here. And then the fact is that rents were incredibly high, right? So if you think you're buying, let's say you're buying an industrial property at market and you're getting at market rents, they tend to even out, they balance out. But when you're getting something lower than market and then the rents are high, there is a really great opportunity to minimize your risk and have a really great investment. I'm not dumb to think that there's these deals all the time, and there are. You just have to have the ability to find them. But this was kind of like it was a rare opportunity to strike, and I put it under control in order to do my due diligence to verify that I'm right. There's something wrong here. There's something that doesn't make sense here, and it made sense. And there was a lot of things that had to happen, but the fact of the matter is, the numbers drove me to this situation where I could put it under contract and make sure I was do as much as I could to make sure that I was going to be successful.
That makes a lot of sense. Can you talk about that part of Albuquerque? Like, how did that? There's something unique about this property in the fact that this was this massive warehouse in a sector of Albuquerque where you would not really expect there to be a massive warehouse. So, can you talk about the Albuquerque as a whole and like how did Albuquerque make this deal unique?
What was interesting about this property was that it's not one building, right? It's what happened is it was a very large warehouse at one time. As I understand it, this building was 100 and something years old, was the distribution point for a furniture store here. And someone chopped it up. And so it was actually condominiumized in for lack of a better word. And so the owner was actually the heir of this furniture store, and they owned the real estate. And I guess he's the one that chopped it up, and he was selling this portion. So it had a common wall to the neighbor, right, on both sides. I actually tried to buy one more, and the owner wouldn't let go. And this backs up to the train, right? There's rail behind it. This building didn't have access to the rail, but there's rails behind it. And right now there's this whole thing going on down there, for the rail yards and the rail walk and so forth. And this is just a really old part of Albuquerque, and it is not a typical deal. And that's probably why the opportunity existed. You have to be comfortable with having a neighbor sharing a wall backed up to the rail. Not a great part of town. But when you look at the numbers and you look at the real estate and you look at the opportunity, it comes together nicely. But at first glance, if you just drove by it, there's probably a lot of people that did and said, no way in hell would I buy this.
Yeah, it's definitely a part of Albuquerque that you even if you don't own a business, you just kind of drive down there. Like, there's wise times to be down there and there's unwise times to be down there, and so I remember when there was a time when me and Colt, we're going to get into this a little bit later, we went and visited this property before you bought it, and we took like a little tour of it, and Colt showed up after he got off of work, and there's kind of this like where like there's all these buildings, it could be any one of these buildings, and it's kind of near downtown Albuquerque. And so we'll get into this just a little bit, but yeah, very not odd but interesting and fascinating to talk about.
For sure.
You said something else when you were describing the deal. You used the term three-phase power. What does that mean?
I wish I could explain it well. The fact of the matter is most things are a lower phase, and 3-phase is high power, and usually in industrial. Just to keep it simple, most people that want to lease industrial or own industrial, having 3-phase power means that you have the ability to power a lot more equipment, heavier equipment, and so forth, because the demand is higher, and that's a big deal. And this one was even a bigger deal because even though we had 3-phase, the tenant that we were moving in there needed more amps, and we had to do a lot of work to get it up to the amperage that they needed. But if it would have cost a lot more if we didn't have 3-phase to begin with. But 3-phase is high power for industrial, and then it depends on the amps that you have there.
You said something else. You said tenant in tow. When you approach property, you usually have a tenant in tow. What does that mean?
Basically, what that means is this property. Okay, let me kind of give you some. Let me step back and give it. So, this property was vacant, right? And so a lot of investors, including myself, would like to see a tenant that would like to lease it. And that what happens is you have cash flow. If you buy a vacant building, even if you buy it for a great price, you have to have a tenant to make it cash flow. Well, here there was a tenant interested. I mean, almost during the due diligence period when I tied it up, we had a few parties that were interested, and this helped me close the deal. Okay, I've got a tenant. I'm going to buy it because I'm going to make the deal. So I did a lease with the tenant. There was a contingency that as long as I bought the building, they were gonna lease the building, right? So there's a contingency on the lease. Well, I bought the building. I had a tenant in tow. I had a tenant ready to go, and that makes it easier for me and my investors, right? That it's going to cash flow day one, right? Having that tenant is what provides the cash flow for that property. If I would have just bought it hoping to get a tenant, I don't have a tenant in tow. And I just close and I say, eventually I'll get it. Now it becomes this more speculation. Here it removes that risk. Now I have a tenant for a long term with bumps in the whole 9 yards that makes it a good return, not only for me as the GP, but for everyone else, all the LPs.
Got it. And so when you went to buy the property, you said you only had an interested tenant. You didn't have a tenant to immediately move in there. And it wasn't until, correct me if I'm wrong, it wasn't until after you bought the property that you actually got a tenant lined up to fill the space. Is that correct?
That's not correct. So to be clear, the numbers made sense. There's a high demand for this property. It had all the bones to make it a successful deal. So I put it under contract. And usually when I put something under contract, I have a time frame to do my due diligence, right? So I've tied up the property, I've given my earnest money, and now I have time to do my due diligence on this property, right? I do some back of the napkin analysis before I get it under contract. Then under contract, I prove what I thought was what was my assessment of the deal, my analysis, and that's where I prove it. I check out the roofs, I check out the property, confirm a lot of the things about the property. And during that time, I'm also hunting for a tenant. If I can land the tenant, then I feel a lot better about closing. If I can't land the tenant, then maybe the demand for this type of property is not what I was thinking. And then I usually can figure out what's wrong, especially if you tour with a bunch of tenants and they point out a lot of things that are wrong. Then it comes to the point of when my due diligence is over, and I'm saying, okay, I'm not going to close on this deal, and I can bow out of this deal. That due diligence period, let's just say you have it under contract and you have 60 days of due diligence and 30 days to close. That 60 days of due diligence is a free period. You do put some money in escrow, but if you write it all correctly, if you decide to cancel the deal before the due diligence period is over, you get that money back.
Got it.
Right? This is called a free look, free period, due diligence period, where you get to make sure that all of your thoughts on this deal, your analysis, basically thinking about how the market's going to react to something on this type of property. This is the time to confirm those. And if you can't confirm them, then you can pull out. Now, after due diligence period, let's just say 60 days hits and I still haven't canceled the contract. Well, now I'm in. Now I can still cancel, depending on the type, what kind of performance I agreed to on the contract, but I lose my earnest money, right? But usually there's a performance clause, like, you could sue each other if someone on one side or the other doesn't perform. Like if I go ahead and close and the seller changes his mind, I can sue him for breaking the contract. If I go past the due diligence and I change my mind, if I don't have the correct language in that purchase agreement, he can come after me for non-performance.
Got it. So let's move into the overall structure of the deal. You referred to yourself as you're the GP of the deal. So who is the GP of a deal when there's an investment happening, and then who are the other players that make an investment deal happen? In speaking in general terms, not specific to any deal.
GP is usually so. Yeah, that's a great question. A GP and LP. GP stands for general partner. LP stands for limited partner. GP usually takes on all the risk within the property. Not all the time, but in most cases, they put the deal together. Let's just leave it at that, because there's always risk for both LP and GP. But the GP puts the deal together, raises the funds, puts the syndication package together, the whole 9 yards. And then the LP basically is the investor. No decision making in most cases. They just kind of invest and they trust in you. They trust in me to make them a return. And I think in some cases I'm the GP. Like in when we talk about the 15s, I was a GP. I invest as an LP too. There's a lot of investments that I do where I throw money at it. Kind of an interesting segue, but I have friends that have investments and they'll pitch me the deal, and if I haven't done a deal with them before, I'll usually do it. Of course, I have some parameters and requirements, but it's kind of like gambling for me. If someone that I like and I trust and they have an opportunity, I'll invest in the deal, and it's usually the minimum amount. And if I make money, then I'll put more into their deals. If someone comes to me and I invest a little bit of money and the deal just kind of tanks, I'll probably never invest money again with them. That's the way I gamble on the LP level. But I like to invest as an LP as much as I like to invest as a GP. An LP, no stress. I'm putting money into a deal that I'm willing to lose, that your mom and I are willing to lose. Well, maybe I'm willing to lose, but your mom's never willing to lose any money. And as a GP, that's the stress part, right? That's where I lose sleep 2 days before I close, because I have investors that are trusting in me. No matter what, as long as I've been doing this, I still lose sleep before I close. And the GP that's the responsibility. That's where the responsibility lies, and that's where the blame goes if the deal bellies up.
So as the GP, it seems like there's a lot of trust involved. Like you have to go to somebody and say, hey, I have this thing, I'm going to do all the legwork, but I need your money to make it happen. How did you get to where people trusted you, like with their money to go do this deal or any of the other deals? Like what was that process like, going from just having a bunch of buddies to like, hey, I'm asking for your money so we can go make more money?
I think that's over time, but I think is that I've been in a situation where I've lost money, or I've been in a situation where the deal's tanked, or it's a stressful deal, and I don't want to be there again. So I'm a lot more conservative than most, and luckily, praise God, the fact is that I have done well in the last, several years. And I built a track record. But it starts with this, though. Usually you provide a really well analysis, a good analysis of the deal. And you also put your money on the deal, right? As a GP, if you don't have a history, you're putting more into the deal, because that's what people want to see, some skin in the game, right? Does that make sense? And when you have skin in the game, most people are willing to put skin in the game as well. As you progress as a GP over time, the GP's putting less and less in the deal. They're still putting money in the deal. Don't get me wrong. But because you're making room for more investors that want to be involved in the deal, but it's little by little building, having more experience, building a track record, and that's how you build trust. There's the initial trust where, hey, if you're like me, hey, I like you, I like this deal, I'm in for minimum, and if it works out great, there's more, I can invest more. And people are building a track record with me. They're building a track record that I can get on board with, right? And okay, these guys are good. They know what they're doing. They're conservative. But I have parameters on deals, right? I don't like a lot of debt. In most cases, not all, but in most cases, if someone's investing with me, it's 100% cash. I don't go get a loan or anything, which reduces the risk to the investor to nothing, but it's really low. And there's a whole discussion on why I like to do that. And a lot of people disagree with me, but there's very rare occasions that I'll take on debt.
Got it.
Did I answer your question? I'm not sure I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Absolutely. And so the general partner takes on all the risk, and then the limited partners are passive. They basically just put up their money so the deal can be done, and the general partner takes on all the risk. And then,
I wouldn't say all the risk, but most of the risk. They put the deal together.
They put the deal together, but they're the ones that the limited partners trust. Like they're the general partner's the one that says, hey, like we trust Rob, therefore we're going to give him the bandwidth to do what he needs to do because of the outcome that we are hoping and ultimately want.
Yeah, and I'll flip that for you though. Like there are investors that I've done deals with that I'll never invite to invest in a deal again. And there's a kind of a unspoken rule. When you're doing a deal, when you're putting a deal together, usually the person that puts the least amount are the ones that squeak the loudest. And so, to be an accredited investor, you have to meet all this criteria. Usually, if there's some investments out there that the minimum is $25,000. But most will do 100, 150, 200,000 a deal. But then there's this one person that does 25, and they have given me the most problems. They're going to sue me because, I'm not doing this or that or whatever. They're not getting the return they thought they would. And, they're asking for, all kinds of things that are pretty not standard. And I can go on. And so usually as the more time and experience that I have, I just have a set of investors that I go to that let me just work the deal. And so it's vice versa too. Like there's some people I would never invite to be an investor.
So earlier you said if you have a buddy of yours that comes and says, hey, I want you to invest in the deal, but you've never done a deal with them before, usually you invest but you do the minimum amount. So when you do that and you're the minimum guy, what are like your personal rules for being the LP so that you get invited back, or basically so someone doesn't say, wow, Rob is the one that squeaks the loudest, right? Like, do you have like, hey, when I invest in something, if I'm the minimum investor, this is how I act? It's
a great question, right? Because I kind of, there's both sides. When I invest, especially just to gamble on a deal and gamble on a person, I don't say a word. They'll never hear from me. I won't bitch about it. If I lose my money, I lose my money. I'm a big boy. And they'll never hear from me, right? If it's a great deal, I'll say, man, you did a great job. I'm in on your next deal. Of course, I have requirements. Of course, I have some guiding principles on every deal. But the fact of the matter is that builds trust. But when I go in as an LP, you will not hear from me. And if you lose it, don't expect me to invest in your next deal.
Interesting. That's cool. Very cool. It's kind of funny too. But so there's the GP and then there's the LPs, and the LP make up the syndicators. Is that correct? So when someone uses the words like the syndicators, are those the LPs?
I think so. And here, let me step back and say, okay, so when we talk about syndication, we're basically we're following guidelines that the SEC gives us. And then there's the 503B, no, Reg D 503B and Reg D 503C. And the Reg D 503B is friends and family. You can't market. You only need like 35 accredited investors. Everyone else can be unaccredited. But you're following guidelines for a syndication. And really what syndication means is you're raising money. You're syndicating a deal and you're raising money for it. The definition, I don't know I think I'm the syndicator really, and I'm syndicating money. And so the LPs are limited partners in the deal that are putting money into the deal.
Got it. So the syndication is the guidelines that you need to follow in order to do the deal. It doesn't necessarily describe the certain members of the deal.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I could be wrong, but like I'm syndicating, that means I'm raising funds. Right, for a deal. I don't think I've never heard of someone being the syndicator or the syndicatees or anything like that. The investors, and there's a GP, limited general partner, limited partner, and that's it. And it could be, and this is a great breakdown, but it could be like, depending on how you put the deal, there's a co-GP, there are members, there's a way that you refer that are really correct titles for everybody. And as a general partner, I could have someone that brings money and gets a slice of the general partnership. So they're a co-GP, right? And then the LPs are members of the syndication and so forth. And there's a whole process. You got a private placement memorandum, which is a PPM, and then you got a subscription. There's a lot that goes in. And basically what those regulations are is a big disclaimer that's saying, hey, if you invest in this, know that you can lose your money. That's the whole process. It's kind of like protecting the consumer here, or protecting the investor.
Got it.
That's the process.
Got it. Another question that came to mind is when earlier in talking about when the GP is first getting started, like they usually put up a lot of money so they can, or more money than they would, so that the LPs see they have some skin in the game. And then as time goes on, to make room for more investors, their money will trickle back so they can make room for other people. As the GP, is there usually a minimum amount of what their return would be? Like, is their return still based on the money they invest, or is there an added bonus because they're the ones that are running the deal? Or is
there's an added
based
bonus
on the deal?
I'm sorry, I didn't let you finish your question. Say that again.
No, I was just going to say, or is it completely based on the deal and the contracts they strike with their LPs and the co-GPs and the members as a whole?
Yeah, usually when you do a syndication, it kind of spells out how the GP is rewarded, right? So depending on the deal, a GP could put 5-10% on it. Let's say it's 10%, right? But the key is, you want to get everyone's money back as soon as possible before I get rewarded. You do not, I've seen it differently, but that's kind of like my guiding principle is a successful investment is where everyone gets their money back first, and then we start splitting the profits. And that's where more of the money for the GP is made. So the GP runs the deal, gets the money back. Now everyone got, and it's called a waterfall. It hits certain levels, and it can be very complicated. I'll try to keep it really simple. But the whole point is that if investors don't get their money back first and I'm getting paid, that's not good. right? And there's a lot of syndicators or GPs that do that. In this situation, you want to protect your investors, and one way to protect your investors is by getting them their money first. Then let's split the profits. Then let me get my reward. That's the way that it should work.
Got it. So let's talk about another interesting aspect of the 15s. The 15s was used in Breaking Bad. And so I believe it was season 6. I have it right here. It was season 6, episode 5, where the 15s was used in. And so I mentioned this earlier, but there was a time before you bought it where me and Colt went to tour the property, and we walk in, and they told us we couldn't have our phones out. They told us all these things that we couldn't do because they hadn't filmed there yet. And you walk in, there's this boxing ring, this little locker room, and ultimately became a episode in Breaking Bad where Saul Goodman and Howard Hamlin of HHM they basically had all this beef, and they fought in the boxing ring. Was that cool for you? Because you've watched Breaking Bad like what, 4 or 5 times at this point, because you watched it by yourself, you watched it with Colt, you watched it with me, you watched it with Jackson, and I think you got one more trip around the sun with Hudson watching the show. But was that cool? Like, forget everything else, forget the numbers, but like buying a building that had some Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul nostalgia to it.
Yeah, first of all, it was a Better Call Saul.
Better Call Saul.
Yeah, it was Better Call Saul, and I'm not really proud of watching Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul with you guys as a father. That's not a proud moment in my life. It's a lot of fun and definitely a lot of good memories. But yeah, it's interesting is I liked the building, and we had it under contract at the time. Me and Colt went there, and it just by chance they were setting up the set in the warehouse for that boxing scene. So it was really damn cool. Being a fan of Breaking Bad, being a fan of Better Call Saul, it was very cool to see it and then see it in the series. And yeah, I couldn't lie to you and tell you, hey, there was a little bit of, hey, I own that building. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of pride and ego there, but it was kind of cool. It was definitely a good memory, and as all, it'll fade too, but that was fun.
Yeah, that was fun. Getting back to the deal as a whole, what year did you buy the building? Was it 21 or 22?
I don't remember.
Okay, so you bought it building in 21 or 22. You sold it almost a year ago. So when we approach an investment deal that we have bought, how do we know when it's time to sell it? Like, what are the parameters, that the checklist that we want to go down, the criteria you could say that say, okay, it's time to sell? That
is a great question, and it's one that I have switched sides on several times. I don't like to sell. I like to build the portfolio, and I like to increase cash flows. But that is not always the right move, and I think it depends on the asset. As with regards to the 15s, I still love that building. I think it's a unicorn. It's something that is very hard to find, and there's days that I regret selling it, and then there's days that I'm glad I've sold it. And one of those reasons is my investors made a home run deal. They killed it. And some have told me it was the best deal they ever did. And that makes me happy, right? And getting my investors their cash flow and then getting them a big pop at the end. I mean, getting my investors their cash back out of the deal that they invested in just through cash flow, and then just selling it, for several times what we paid for it, was a home run. But it depends. There are people that, when they buy it, they make all the improvements to a property. They increase rents in the whole 9 yards, and then they sell it. There's a specific strategy there, because what happens is when they buy it, they make all these improvements, and let's just say that they've doubled the value. Let's just say, well, there's all these these things that can impact the value. So let's say you buy it at $1 million and you can sell it at $3 million. Great. And that's probably, and there's people that do that because when interest rates go up, guess what happens to the value of the property? It goes down. And all that work you did to get the property from 1 million to 3 million, what happens is that it gets eaten away by all kinds of different things that you have no control over. And so people like to get in and then get out and make that profit and go move it in 1031 into another deal. And that's a smart move. You can't argue with that. And sometimes I think I should do that. But there are properties that I have paid off and I've had them for years, and they just cash flow. And I love the cash flow. But that property needs to be improved on. After time, the roof starts to leak. The parking lot needs to be replaced. The lighting needs to be redone. The pylon signs need to be done. So it takes more money, and that eats away. But it just depends on the property, depends on the investor and what they like to do. And I like to hold. I'm comfortable with that, but I sell. There are people that just buy, improve, and sell. That makes so much sense too. I don't think there's a wrong answer here. It's just a preference. And I argue with that all the time.
So if there might not be a right answer, is there a wrong answer? Like, is there all the time, this is the wrong reason?
The wrong answer, that wrong answer comes up when you buy it. And what I mean by that is if you don't buy it right, you're in a situation and selling might be the only answer and you sell it at a loss or whatever. So, you have to buy it right. When you own something and it cash flow and it's doing well, I don't think there's, if you decide to sell it or not, if you decide to hold it, I don't think there's a wrong answer unless you know something's coming, and it's impossible to know that.
Yeah.
If you buy a Chick-fil-A at a 3.5 cap, and then this is when interest rates were really low, and now they're at 7.5, and you're holding a Chick-fil-A at 3.5, and you have these bumps every 5 years or whatever, but you could move your money into a treasury and get 5% return with really no risk, but you have your money in a Chick-fil-A. That's a bummer, right?
Yeah.
And so it just depends on the rationale, and not everyone is going to win every deal. I have lost. Luckily, I've won more than I've lost, but it just depends.
Got it. So, in pertains to this deal, you have a quote that you'd like to say about this deal. You put it in your LinkedIn post about the deal, and it's come up multiple times in other podcasts you've done or conversations, coaching, that kind of thing. But the quote you had was, fall in love with the numbers. The numbers don't lie, but your emotions will. How did that influence this deal, and how does that influence your deals in general?
So this was something that I learned way back when from a pretty famous investor coach several years ago. Probably 25 years ago. And the thing is that not everyone does this, and a lot of people disagree, but here's the point, is that I like to get the numbers on a deal, and I like to do a back of the napkin kind of analysis. And really, that's just information that I have off the offering memorandum or what have you. Maybe I have a rent roll, maybe I have some detailed financials, but I just do a back of the napkin, and where does this deal make sense? I don't look at the property, I don't fall in love with the property, I just look at the numbers. Because what happens is, and it's inexperienced investors will go look at a deal and they'll see how pretty the view is and how pretty the rooms are. And let's just say it's a multifamily, such a beautiful, and then all of a sudden you fall in love emotionally, and then you start justifying why the deal works. So now you fall in love with this deal, you want this property, now you start looking at the numbers. And, let's just say property management is 5%. Of the expenses, and what you do is, well, I'm going to self-manage, so I don't have to worry about deleting the adding to the expense of the property management. Oh, I don't need so much in reserves because, I just, all of a sudden, because you're emotionally justifying something. And it's kind of like dating. If you are dating someone, that is the time to have the highest expectations, because this is the best you're going to see this person in every situation. And so you have the highest expectations. So you're judging the situation based on what you have in front of you. Because once you get married, you have no expectations. And that's the way you stay married. And I'm using marriage as an example to investing, right? Let's just use the facts you have. Don't go look at it. Don't go fall in love with it. Try to keep emotion out of it. And that will keep you a straight head, and you're looking at the numbers. Yeah, it's 5%, taxes, insurance, expenses. Then you have a really clear head and say, hey, this deal doesn't work at this price, but the deal works at this price. And then you can make your offer. And then now you have permission to do all the due diligence you need to make sure. When you get emotionally, you start making some really irrational, you're in a position to make some irrational decisions. And when you do that, you compromise your analysis, and then you're sunk. Now you get an asset, and guess what? You're going to hate it because it's killing you, because you made all these assumptions that were emotionally done, and emotion lies to you. I don't know if that marriage analogy works, but you know what I think you understand my.
No, I makes sense. The way you've always told to me was when you're dating, you tolerate nothing, because when you're married, you have to tolerate everything. So no, I get it. In the same idea, some different words, but I totally get it. Well, Dad, that's all that we got for today. So thanks for your time, and this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's good hanging out with you.
All right.